Yeah, here we go. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism. I'm Arlindo, the philosophical artist, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Melvin Morse, once voted by his peers as one of America's best doctors and top pediatrician in the country. Dr. Morse has authored several articles and books on paranormal phenomena and near-death experiences, including the New York Times bestsellers Closer to the Light and Where God Lives. Dr. Morse has also been interviewed on Oprah Winfrey and Larry King about Closer to the Light and near-death experiences, and has also appeared in an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. I would urge our viewers to visit the website www.melvinmorse.com, melvinmorsemd.com, sorry.
Yeah.
And you are also the head of the Institute of the Scientific Study of Consciousness, the ISSC. Dr. Morse, welcome to the show. And I would ask you, before we start talking about anything, uh, what is consciousness to you? Is it some kind of ontological primitive in reality, some kind of field? Yeah, just curious about that one question before you take it away.
Well, consciousness is the bedrock of the universe. It's it's the substrate of the universe. I know that that's kind of a different idea than you know we you sort of alluded to materialism we were talking about before. So the old paradigm was that there was like these little tiny, you know, little atoms, and then those atoms clumped up into molecules, and then those molecules clumped up into, single cell organisms, and then they became more and more complex. And then at some point, that complexity created consciousness, sort of as an epiphenomena. The consciousness, that was not even really necessary for, under that line of thinking. Um,
Yeah.
for life is just sort of almost a byproduct of the brain, so to speak. And that's seen in a lot of philosophies, and uh, back in the particularly in the early 1900s, you got into a lot of behavioralism where consciousness wasn't necessary, or consciousness wasn't even seen as a important part of human existence. All of that is that's the old paradigm. Um,
Yeah.
I, you know, but I want to quickly say I'm quite aware that the new paradigm is not here. I, you know, I, I love talking to you because I'm really a medical scientist. As I mostly did critical care medicine, and a neuroscientist by training. Uh,
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I don't really, I'm sort of a newcomer to to the whole idea of, paranormal phenomena and near-death experiences, and
Yeah.
and this sort of thing. Um, but
It's funny.
there,
Yeah, sorry. It's funny that you have a medical background because very recently, because before we got in touch with each other, me and my wife were watching Grey's Anatomy. I mean, she's watched Grey's Anatomy years ago, and then she decided to revisit it, and it got me
yeah,
in the mood for this kind of conversation. And one of the episodes that we watched very recently, and I said, actually, this is going to get me in the mood to talk to Dr. Morse, was someone who had visions. He claimed to have visions. So in the show, obviously it's a fictitious character, but he claimed to be having visions, and he would say things that he couldn't possibly know about to the doctors, and the doctors were like, "Huh? What's going on here?" So he got the nickname psychic, but obviously lots of doctors at the hospital were materialists, and they were saying, well, he's not really a psychic. Sometimes I think he's guessing, or this, that, and the other. And there was something wrong with his brain, and one of the doctors tried to say to him, "You're not really having visions, you're having hallucinations and you're having um, seizures." And he said, "No, they're visions." And then you would say things that he couldn't possibly know about, which would surprise that doctor. And eventually, he was scared of having this operation to fix his brain because he thought,
I
if I have
remember
this
this
operation,
episode,
I
right?
might lose my gift. And that
Yeah.
made me think of I don't know if you heard of the reducing valve analogy for the brain by Aldous Huxley. And I said to my wife, this is reminding me of the reducing valve. And if he has an operation and they fix him, they might tighten his valve, so to speak, and he might lose access to the mind at large. Does that make sense? I mean, do you find that that's
But
a
let me challenge you a little bit then. Well, wait, before I challenge you on that point. Um, so I told you the old paradigm is materialism.
yeah,
Uh, from a scientific viewpoint, materialism is dead,
yeah,
has been dead for 100 years. There is not even a scientific definition of matter anymore. There's no universally accepted definition. I mean, that's how dead materialism is. So when I hear people talking about, that science is against spirit, they don't realize that the reunion, the great, the awaited reunion of science and spirituality is at hand. And I mean, it's great to be able to talk to, an artist like you, because you're seeing a different side from the scientific side. All right. So
that's right.
what is the current paradigm? Um, well, it hasn't come into being yet. It's not generally accepted. However, the idea that it's a top-down way of looking at life, that consciousness is the substrate of reality, and that consciousness then works through this so-called material world. This world is not material at all. Uh,
Right.
it's uh, it's an illusion,
It's
and
almost
it's a
like,
prime.
yeah, it's almost like they made up this adjective known as materialism, materials, and then suddenly they got people to believe in it, when in actual fact, everything appears in consciousness. It's really strange, isn't it? How is
Yeah,
it that um, people we regard to be so intelligent, like people like, say, Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, for example, how is it that they can convince people that there is something outside of mind, beyond mind, that somehow produces mind as an illusion, and then people just believe in it? It's really strange, isn't it? And
I agree, because they're not looking at the evidence. They're not looking at the data. But just to finish out, the new scientific paradigm, I think Robert Lanza is, I think, regarded as one of the world's smartest scientists. At
yeah,
age 13, he was conversing with medical scientists at Harvard because he was genetically altering a chicken. Um, so, I mean, he is beyond a doubt one of the most brilliant men. And he has, proposed well over 20 years ago what he calls biocentrism. But, this idea that it's consciousness that is the 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 matter of the universe, that
yeah,
we are all based on consciousness. So and consciousness, if you look at what is reality, what do the physicists tell us is reality? It's this gigantic, infinite electromagnetic field in which time and space don't exist. So
right,
everything is happening all at once. And that's a nice, people who have visited that field, such as you, during your lucid dreaming, tell us that it's made of love.
yeah,
So those the people who've actually interacted with it, people who have died, their brains are no longer functioning, so they're able to interact with this. Uh, you know, the real. A child once told me it was real, Dr. Morse. It was realer than real.
wow.
So that's the true nature of reality. And it's clearly conscious and it's clearly filled with love. I don't think that they're, all theoretical physicists are all writing, philosophical books in their spare time because what they learn in the laboratory is so counterintuitive to this experience.
Yeah.
So, what is this experience? What's going on right now? What's happening is that our biological sensors are sampling that electromagnetic field and changing what it's sampling into bioelectric signals, which are then come to our brain, and then our brain creates this reality.
Wow.
So this is the illusion.
Yeah.
I'm always it breaks my heart, Arlinda, when I'm on Facebook and I see people they tell you these spiritual experiences that could start a religion, and then they go, but it was just a hallucination.
Right.
It's flipped. What they had, the realer than real. This is the hallucination. And again, I want to emphasize to people this is neuroscience 101. If
Yeah.
people want to understand spirituality, if you want to understand like the vision that you told me about before we started, which I hope we get back to because it's chock full of things to talk about. Um, that if they you have to understand that this is created. Uh, we don't even perceive reality. We create a mental image in our mind of this
What's happening?
so-called reality.
Yeah.
Even colors. I mean, this is how even colors do not exist in nature. Colors are created by our brain. And when you think about it, of course that's true. Because when you're 2 and 3 years old, your parents are saying to you, that's red, that's red, that's red, that's red, until finally we have a collective understanding of what the color red is. And then that just expands out from there until we have a something that we all collectively share. Um, so, if people, though, I was getting back to it on public broadcasting system here in the United States, they have a six-part series on the brain, and it, if you watch that, you'll start to understand how this is the created reality. This is the hallucination, spiritual visions by and far are into a peek into what is real.
I see. It's really strange because I've been on a journey where I was raised by a very skeptical father and a very spiritualist mother, and she's got her African beliefs and religious beliefs, and that they're divorced now. And growing up and going to school and college, I was raised to believe in materialism somehow. And and when I
All
began
were,
to, and I've always been interested in
yeah.
hallucinations and visions and dreams and stuff like that. And and I began to take psychedelics. I was experimenting with psychedelics as a young man, and would always question, is this just illusions or is there something more? And I would feel inside me that there's something more to reality than what people are saying to me, because I would at university people would say, it's all just made by the brain, it's just illusions, just hallucinations, and people would believe this like it's some kind of established fact. And I would continue to experiment, but I think deep down inside, I was still very much agnostic. And sometimes I would pretend to be very clever and pretend to be also a materialist with my colleagues. But then I would uh, wonder inside my mind, and I would be reluctant to discuss these things with people around me. But online, I would join groups about lucid dreaming and then I would share my experiences and I would let go and be freer. But something happened to me at university, right? And I've never told a medical professional. So you're probably the first one who's
Oh,
going to
good.
hear this,
Thank
right?
you. I'm honored.
So at university, um, I went through a very self-destructive phase and I was beginning to feel really depressed and I wasn't attending. Um, the classes as much as I should, and I was starting to go to the Undercroft pub on campus at university. I was going there quite a lot, and I was taking a lot of alcohol. I was drinking a lot of beer, and I began to smoke marijuana on a daily basis. And one particular day, I didn't have anything to eat. I was just smoking marijuana, had a lot of alcohol, and then I felt like using the loo, and I ended up collapsing in front of the urinal. And there was another guy there who was also very much a marijuana smoker, and I collapsed in front of him. So to him, it looked like I had just fainted. And what happened next was I felt like I was in this very peaceful state and like I was resting on a cloud, right? And I had no worries in the world, nothing. I felt so peaceful. But then all of a sudden, I began to be curious about the state I was in. And suddenly I found myself back in the Undercroft. And I had a 360-degree view of the pub, and I could see people's heads and tables and people talking, and I could hear their chatter, and I was observing this from like the top, from near the ceiling.
Of course, yeah.
And yeah, and I could hear people and I could feel their emotions and I could feel that they were trying to connect with one another and they also worried about how they came across to other people. And there wasn't much thought about where I was. I was just observing people and the environment. So there was no thought of, oh, I'm here right now. But I could feel myself just observing. And then I began to think, oh, what's this? What's going on? And as I did so, I began to move. And as I moved on top of the heads of people, it's like I was moving gradually, like I was moving through frames of space, like mouse trailing. And I found it really strange. And and I was like, what's going on? Where am I? And then suddenly I was back in the loo and I felt my head on this guy's lap, and he was slapping my face and trying to revive me, and going, "Hey, wake up, wake up, wake up!" and splashing water on my face. And then I felt really uncomfortable, and I thought to myself, "Oh no!" It's really funny because the very first thought I had in my head was, "I feel so uncomfortable. Oh no, I'm here again. I'm this body again." I was so happy there, and now I'm here. And the guy was annoying me because he kept slapping me. And then I ended up saying to him, I'm okay," like that. And then he could smell the marijuana in my pocket, and he said to me, "Why don't you give me that? Because you shouldn't take this anymore because you collapsed." And I was like, "No, no, I'm fine, I'm fine." And he was like, "Should I call the doctor?" And I said, "No, no, maybe just give me some water, take me back to the pub, give me some water." And then my friends came. They were like, "Oh, is everything okay?" And they went to the barman. They asked for a glass of water. So I never had any proper medical assistance, and I never went to a hospital. So I don't know. I don't have no professional, no expert said to me, "You nearly died." All I have was what that guy who found me collapsed in front of the urinal. All I have was him saying to my friends, "You should have seen how he looked. He was very pale." So no medical expert said to me, "You nearly died. You needed medical assistance." I never went to the hospital, and yet I had what would you say, an out of body experience. And I
Oh,
remember,
absolutely.
yeah, and I was looking around in the pub when they were like holding me and giving me water. I remember the sounds in the pub and the people around, and I thought, oh, have I just been here before? It doesn't seem like I imagined what I experienced when I was out, if that makes sense. It seems like I was just here a while ago because everything just seemed to match what I had seen in my experience. I mean, what
Yeah,
do you make of that? And it's a shame I never told this to anyone apart from you and my wife
yeah.
later, when I uh when we got together and I eventually talked about this. But at the time, I didn't even dare to say that to anyone at university. So, and
All right.
if they watch
I'm
this,
I'm I'm going to respond to you, but I already have a list of comments that you've made that I have to respond to first.
okay, yeah,
Okay. Okay. First of all, you made the point that there is, in fact, no scientific reason to believe in materialism. That's absolutely correct. It's really should be seen as a philosophy. Meaning that, people just made it up.
yeah,
And I know that you're with a group of philosophers, so you have to understand I'm a critical care physician. I don't have a lot of patience with philosophy, but there is no empirical evidence supporting materialism whatsoever.
right,
And yet, as you say, scientists, people in the public all the time, they say, well, science doesn't believe that. Well, science is the observation of reality. That's where all science begins.
yeah,
And then taking those observations, creating hypotheses, trying to, make sense of them. What do they mean? So, for example, you know, uh, these French back in the days when they thought that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around us, well, these farmers kept saying that these meteors, big rocks are landing in our backyard. And,
yeah,
that didn't fit with the paradigm of the time. This was new information. And, one scientist, of course, initially the farmers are crazy. Farmers just making it up. They obviously these farmers just want to be on Oprah, so they've just, are the equivalent of Oprah of that day. But once they actually started to realize that this was happening, then the new paradigm came. So, uh, what's going on now is that we're starting to observe more and more people who have been to the where their brains no longer function, and we know that our brains have mechanisms to permit out of body experiences. To, but you didn't just have an out of body experience. You entered into that world of love.
yeah,
You had empathy. You understood what other people were thinking, and you felt it as if you were thinking it.
yeah,
Which so you were so you were out of your individual body and back into the sort of collective consciousness. So
yeah,
what are we to make of the fact that the human brain has specific areas which trigger and allow the kind of experience that you described? And again, this is not controversial. Wilder Penfield, the father of modern neurosurgery,
yeah.
he documented this, easily 75 years ago. He took stainless steel needles, stimulated areas of people's brains while he was doing neurosurgery on them. A lot of neurosurgery is done while the patient is conscious. And so he would stimulate areas of the brain and to see, he documented here's an area of the brain that makes your arm move. Here's an area of the brain that allows you to have speech. And
That's
in
interesting.
an area of the brain called the right temporal lobe, when he stimulated it, people said things like, oh God, I'm leaving my body. Or even more interesting, they'd say, I'm half in and I'm half out.
Out. Wow.
And so we have known this that there are specific pathways in the brain that allow us to have spiritual experiences. I'm just going to brag a little bit, Orlando. I propose this both in the medical literature and in a book I wrote. Uh, are you seeing me anymore?
Yeah,
Anyway, oh, you are good. Okay,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just on my end. Um, back in we wrote a book called my team wrote a book called Where God Lives. because
Yeah.
we said this one specific area of the brain is the God spot. I wrote that both in the medical literature, the peer-reviewed medical literature.
Right.
Uh, so other scientists had a look at it. Since then, there's only been one person who's objected to what I said, and that's a guy named Mario Beauregard. He used to be at the University of, I think, Toronto,
Right.
or maybe Montreal. I think he was at Montreal. Uh, he said, no, no, Dr. Morse is all wrong. It's not a God spot, it's a God brain. His
Right.
research shows that probably a third of the brain is dedicated to allowing us to have spiritual experiences.
I
So they're
see.
clearly not hallucinations. What happened to you is obviously not a hallucination. What is a hallucination? A hallucination is dysfunction of the brain. So here, here's an intensive care unit hallucination. You're in the intensive care unit, and no, no, you think that you're at home with your wife, having a cup of tea. Um, your brain is not functioning properly. You're no longer oriented, to time and space. Um, what happened to you? It sounds like you were, in fact, oriented to time and space, to who you were. You were just having a very different sort of experience than the one that the ordinary pathways in our brain permit us to have. Um,
Yeah.
I've got to challenge you a little bit here. Let's go back to that Grey's Anatomy thing, where the guy
Yeah.
says, "Wait a minute, I don't want you to operate on my brain because I don't want to lose my gift." Well, maybe we're supposed to lose our gifts. Maybe children who've had near-death experiences tell me that we're here for a reason, and that reason is to learn lessons of love. So
Right.
maybe we're not supposed to be having all these out-of-body experiences. There's a reason that we have this created reality that we all share. And that's to learn uh, lessons of love, very painful lessons of love. The lessons of love that we learn in this reality are, you know, involve, murder, torture, serial killers,
Yeah.
cruelty, uh, even the kindest people, end up, dealing with jealousy, dealing with the idea that I'm more important than you. Uh, the ego. All of those things are incredibly complex lessons which need to be learned, and we can only learn them if we're within this brain and we believe that this reality is the only reality. Um, I just recently finished a study of a mediumship, and we asked our mediums, the same sort of questions. What is the nature of this reality? Arlindo, I have to tell you, by the way, we didn't ask them questions because I thought to myself, wait a minute, if they're mediums, I don't have to ask them a question. They already know the questions. So we coded all the questions as numbers. And so we said to the mediums, alrighty, I've got a question for you. It's, 357-826-498. Because I felt that was the only way that we could truly get the brain and the ego of the medium out of the way and
Wow.
hear the pure answer from the other reality. And the answers that we got back were things like, yeah, you know, uh, when you talk about spiritual realities, the horrors of Gaza are part of the spiritual realities that you're here to learn from. You know, why do you fear death? The death is the one that's not real. The people in Gaza all of us are not really going to die. We're just going to leave this invented reality and return to the reality that you saw in your lucid dream or that you saw in your experience.
Right.
I, am sort of you said so many things that I feel I have to respond to because I want to get to the point of, well, do you have to be near death to have this sort of experience? Because that is what you were sort of hinting at. We're sort of like, well, was I really, near death, or or maybe this was a marijuana-induced hallucination, or etc. Well, as
Yeah.
a critical physician, I can tell you, nobody knows what near death is.
Right.
When you walk into a modern intensive care unit, the patient that you think is the healthiest is probably the one that's going to die later that day. And the patient that you think is a train wreck is probably the one that's going to be living tomorrow.
Right.
So we don't know what near death is, but it doesn't matter anyway, because these pathways, which do in fact are triggered by the processes of dying, they can be triggered through meditation, they can be triggered through lucid dreaming. They are they're no different than the neurological pathways allow us to see, or the neurological pathways which allow us to hear. We have hardwired neurological pathways which allow us to have spiritual experiences. Most of us have it in the context of dying. But when you read that, I mean, who knows more about meditation than the ancient Tibetans, that, meditated for, 14, 16 hours a day for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Um, when you read their texts from, 800 AD, they clearly say that that still light that comes to us when we die is the same still light that you can trigger by through meditation, because you're activating those same pathways. Um, so it doesn't really matter to me whether you were near death or not. I think that's uh, when I did my formal studies of near death experiences, we had to define what was near death, but that's because of the artificial environment of wanting to create a study in which we would have just one variable to look at.
Yeah.
And the one variable we looked at was, you know, I studied children at Seattle Children's Hospital. Um, we studied all survivors of cardiac arrest over about a 15-year period of time. So in that context, we wanted to define what was near death, because we wanted to look at, what was different about children who had a cardiac arrest, which, unlike what you see in Grey's Anatomy, you
Yeah.
have, a slim chance of surviving. It's actually bad for you to have your heart stop beating. Um,
Yeah.
but and then we carefully compared them to children who were not near death by our criteria. Children who were sick, had a lack of oxygen to their brain, treated with drugs, were in the scary intensive care unit, so, controlling for the fear death response.
Yeah.
But given our, the criteria of our study, they were not near death. And when we interviewed these children after the fact, uh, and by the way, we didn't say to them, this is a study of near death experiences.
Right.
We said, we would like you to tell us, what are the psychological aspects of being in a modern intensive care unit. Uh, so, but when we asked them questions, what do you remember about being in the intensive care unit? Our children who had a lack of oxygen to the brain, treated with all sorts of drugs, etc. Those patients fit what is traditional neurology, in which they said, I can't remember anything about being in the intensive care unit.
Right.
The ones who were near death also had that great memory gap, which, is the loss of our short term memory caused by trauma. But they would say that within that great memory gap, they would say, like, for example, this is an 8-year-old girl that I had to put a needle into her heart to resuscitate her.
Yeah.
So that's
Wow.
near death. And she said, I don't remember anything about being in the hospital. I don't remember how I got to the hospital. I don't remember leaving the hospital. All I remember was you telling those nurses you wanted that crash cart thing. So the only memory she has was actually at a time where her brain was no longer functioning, where we knew that she was clinically dead. That's the only memory she had of
Wow.
being in the intensive care unit. And her memory was that she left her physical body. Uh, you know,
That's so strange.
yeah, this is kind of an aside, but I want to share with your um, viewers one of the main reasons I'm talking to you today. Uh, this, instead of spending time with my wife this morning, why I'm talking to you, uh,
It's all
because
right.
I feel that I have an obligation to do it. Because when you hear these stories for the first time, you know they're authentic. And I'm going to give you an example with this little girl. So this little girl says to me, I heard you telling the nurses you wanted that crash cart thingy. And then you started doing something, and then I left my body. And then she says to me, and then I was back. And I said, well, what do you mean by that you were back? And she goes, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So that, I mean, but you only hear that on the very first interview, and that's what I want to share with your listeners. I mean, when you hear a little girl going, that's what I'm trying to figure out, you know she's trying to describe an authentic experience which actually happened to her. And she's trying to make as much sense of it as we are. But she knows it has something to do with death because I later asked her whether she was afraid to die or not. And she said, I'm not afraid to die anymore because I know a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, so um,
Wow.
for our study, we had to define what was near death and what isn't. But as I've told you, we have the neurological pathways to have these experiences. Well, why don't we have them all the time? Well, because we're supposed to be inside our head learning our
Yeah.
lessons of love. You know, if if we knew that this was truly an illusion, and we knew that the various sufferings and the various challenges that we have uh, in our lives were just an illusion, we wouldn't learn anything from it. Um,
Yeah.
uh, One gentleman, he was 11 years old. He fell off of a cliff or excuse me, he fell off of a bridge where he was fishing, standing on the edge of, the ledge, and he fell um, and was saved by hitting a tree.
Wow.
But while he was during his experience, he had a near-death experience, and he said that he learned from his experience that this is a school. But he said we're not supposed to know what the grading system is. We're not supposed to know what is right and what is wrong. All the judgments that we make as human beings, those are just internal judgments that we're just making up. They have nothing to do with what we're really supposed to learn in this reality. So I love the way he said that. He said, if we did know it, well, then we would try to rig the grading system. We would be trying to cheat on our lessons of love, which of course we would
Yeah.
be.
That makes
Uh,
sense.
you know, so so this is an artificially constructed reality. Simply is no question about it. And so when you tell me about that experience that you had, what a blessing, because at least it tells you that this isn't all that there is. And that's why it breaks my heart when the people, just dismiss these as hallucinations or dismiss these as, you know, uh,
Yeah. At the time, I actually thought,
fanciful things of their mind.
yeah.
You had a glimpse into what is real.
Yeah.
Well, why is that important? You know, I worked with a lot of mostly ex-prisoners, the ex-incarcerated, who've done a lot of bad things in their lives.
Right.
And yet, even Nazi prison guards, when they die, get a big hug from God. They do.
Right.
It's unconditional love. So unconditional love means no conditions. It in
That's
fact means,
yeah,
that no matter what you've done in this life,
yeah,
you're still going to get a big hug from God
right.
because the fabric of the universe is love. And you got well, you've had it twice. The picture, does your audience see the picture that I am seeing? The picture you described to me of your lucid dream was another glimpse into the reality that is love.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it does seem sort of counterintuitive. We're here to learn these incredibly painful lessons, which often have to do with, you know, the dark side, the evil side of humans. And yet it's all it's all sort of encapsulated uh, in a sea of love.
yeah,
So we have lessons for some reason. That, and people have often asked me about reincarnation and such as that, and children have described to me uh, reincarnation. So, I mean, who knows more about the nature of reality than children who've died and actually have seen it? And I've had too many children say to me things like, "Well, when I was in heaven, I saw grandpas and grandmas and babies who were
wow,
waiting to be born." But it makes sense because it probably takes a lifetime to just learn one lesson.
yeah,
And then we have to learn and learn and learn and learn and learn. But I think that to know, as I was telling you, I've worked with criminals, uh, but it's incredibly reassuring to them to know. But wait a minute, no matter what it is you've done in this life,
yeah,
you're still going to get a hug from God when you die. And that in itself can be transforming. Because a lot of times we get into this mindset of, I've done so many bad things and I'm such a bad person and this, that, and the other, that then we think, you know, I'm just a piece of, you know,
yeah.
dung.
I
But
see.
and then that in itself can then breed, more and more dysfunctional behaviors because you think you're worthless. Um, this is a whole new way of understanding reality. No matter what you've done, it's part of your lessons of love.
I
It's part of
see.
what you're here to learn. And knowing that can be extremely transformative, can really go, wow. So I'm not burdened by my past. I
Yeah,
actually can now change and know that regardless of what it is that I've done, I'm going to come to a place where there's no judgment, where where it's unconditional.
yeah,
I'm going to share with you real quick a near-death experience from this is an adult, Dr. Robert Kennedy.
right.
He was nearly murdered, uh, and he tells about his near-death experience. And he says that he said, if my experience is any, guidepost or any indication of what, this reality is, he said that I was, I didn't die alone as you would fear, but I died in this enormous sea of love. And I learned from it that I wanted to learn to love like that, or even more important, I wanted to learn to be able to accept the love that others have for us. And
Wow.
so, when you see it that way, then you can understand that no matter what your experiences in life are, no matter what you've done in life, it then gives you insight into how, you know, learning to accept the love that others have for you, even if you yourself don't love yourself.
Yeah,
That's obviously one of the most important things that we have to learn in this reality. For some reason, Orlando, there's just another story I want to tell you before we go, and then I'm going to turn it back to you
No, go
to
ahead. This is
follow up
very
with.
interesting, actually,
But
and it seems like love
well,
is very central to all of this, to all this experience. And
no doubt about it. But I wanted to go back to this issue of what does science think of all this?
yeah,
And going back to the materialistic philosophy of which there's not a shred of evidence to support, just by the way.
yeah,
So when I was a medical student, I was at Johns Hopkins and I studied under the great Vernon Montcastle. And he was a neurosurgeon. And some of the things you see in Grey's Anatomy are actually his cases. Um, I took care of a patient of his, which he removed half of the patient's brain,
right.
and he did that to try to control seizures. Um, so, one of my jobs as a medical student was to then carefully document what deficits, removing half of this was a young teenager, by the way.
Oh, I
This
see.
effect would not be seen in adults, what I'm going to describe to you. This is a young teenager, had half of his brain removed. And to my great surprise, he had no deficits. Well, he had a slight
Wow.
limp. That was the most that he had. But he still had his personality. He still had his sense of humor. He still had all his memories, um, which gives us a nice hint that memories are probably not stored in the brain. Um, which again, not which is not neurological heresy because we don't have a theory of how memory can be stored in the brain.
Yeah.
So anyway, on rounds, I said to Dr. Boncastle, I said, I don't get this. I mean, this isn't the neurology that I was taught. Even here at Johns Hopkins, I was never taught that you could remove half of a person's brain, and yet they seemed,
A
and
completely
Dr.
different paradigm.
Boncastle, yeah, he looks at me and he goes, "Well, what the f do they know?" So
Wow.
keep that in mind. When we're trying to puzzle out what scientists know and what they don't know. The children that the child I resuscitated uh, on the floor of the lobby of Seattle Children's Hospital, and he opened his eyes and he looked at me and he said, "That was weird. You just sucked me back into my body." That child probably knows more than most neurologists know about the functioning of the human brain.
Wow, no
Well,
doubt.
I'm turning it back to you.
Yeah,
What
sure.
more are we going to talk about?
There's so many questions I have, and also it's become very clear to me over the years that people have become very materialistic and they've started to believe all these assumptions from their theories that there is only matter and mind is some kind of illusion. But I've always been deep down a bit skeptical of materialism itself. So I've always held the door open to other possibilities. So I wasn't
That's why I
completely,
told you the story of Dr. Moncastle, because that's the ultimate proof that, so we have to look at the evidence.
yeah,
And that case is not the only case. It's well described in the literature. Um, uh, Many neurosurgeons have pointed out that patients, they split the brain or remove half of the brain. If
yeah,
materialism was real, how
like
come
a
those patients
colostomy,
can
isn't
still
it? Yeah.
think? You know, so when you look at the, or I have a patient that I don't know, so she's not really my patient, but I've worked with. She lost about 80% of her brain to a stroke, and she was in a coma for many years and was awake the entire time. Had the unfortunate experience of hearing doctors and nurses talking about eventually stopping life support on her. She's like, no,
Oh
no,
God.
don't.
Oh my
But
God.
of course, she couldn't communicate with them. But she did, in fact, a nurse that worked with her finally realized that her blinks had meaning, and they were able to finally communicate with her through blinking. And then
Wow.
as time went by, she did regain everything. So again, that's the evidence. There's no evidence supporting materialism,
No.
but when I mean, how does a materialist explain how a patient can lose 80% of their brain and yet retain all their memories, have a sense of humor? Think about it. Senses of
Yeah.
humor are very, very complicated um, cognitive behavior. To retain a sense of humor means that your brain is really functioning properly. And yet,
Yeah.
this is a patient that only had 20% of her brain left.
Yeah.
And, you know, the, they
It's become quite
hopefully,
apparent, yeah,
yeah,
that
hopefully
materialism has
we're
all
going
these
to start to
holes.
learn this. See, it used to be thought that the brain was some sort of fixed, uh, that you sort of had these fixed brain cells and that they had all specific functions. And as your brain cells died, every time you take a drink, a couple of brain cells will die, but that they could never regain their function again. Um, that is not true, Orlando. That is,
Right.
again, the evidence has shown that that's not true. We now know that there's a phenomena called neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And this goes back to your early questions about what is consciousness. Because neuroplasticity is that experience changes our brain.
Right.
So when when you have every time you think a thought, you actually change your brain. Every time you curse somebody when you're driving on the road, you're showering your body with harmful neuropeptides, and you're altering your brain
Yeah.
in an unhealthy way. Uh, People who meditate change their brain. Uh, but there's prosaic examples of this. Great musicians,
Yeah.
great musicians, their brain actually changes. So it's not that they have some sort of special brain which permits them to play the piano. Not at all. The evidence is that some something allows them to play the piano brilliantly, and that in itself changes their brain.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so all of this, basically is saying materialism is dead. It
Yeah.
is, because neuroplasticity that's really just a scientific term for saying that consciousness, changes. The universal consciousness changes what we think, and
I
that we're
see.
some tied into that. And that's not, that just sounds like a lot of, philosophy again. But now we understand that there's actually neurological evidence that this is correct.
Yeah.
That we can actually, when we look at the science of consciousness, we understand. Wait a minute, it's not the brain creating consciousness. Consciousness not only is the brain some sort of reducing valve, as you pointed out earlier, which it obviously is, but that our brains are constantly being changed
Yeah.
by our interactions with consciousness,
I see.
in ways that we can document and measure now.
So it's almost like the brain is an echo of some kind of mentation. So the brain would just be an image, an after effect, or something that we look at. Oh yeah, that's taken place. It's almost like consciousness comes first, the mentation comes first, and then the images, including the brain that we see, are only reflections of something that's taken place in consciousness. Does that make sense? So it's
Beautiful way to put it. That's what a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. That's you know I love that. That's the kind of thing I talk about for 20 minutes, and you've summed it up in three sentences. You're
right.
that that's my scientific understanding.
Right.
That's that's my started my training at Johns Hopkins, uh, professor at the University of Washington for many, many years, and then continued this kind of research and neuroscientific explorations after my retirement.
I
That's my
see.
scientific
Yeah. It's
belief, which you have summed up in I think a more spiritual way.
yeah.
And that brings up an important issue that I think needs to be addressed. I think one of the biggest problems that we have now is that scientists and physicists are using a different vocabulary
Right.
than spiritual thinkers and you know when I told you I did this study of mediumship. I worked with a couple of Harvard neuroscientists on it, but they didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Right.
In terms of putting their name on the paper, etc. They just wanted to help me out behind the scenes
Yeah.
because they don't like the word medium. You
Wow.
know, we
That's
don't want to
interesting.
be, we don't want to be, associated with mediums. Well, mediumship is simply, the human brain communicating with some sort of discarnate spiritual entity.
Right.
That's not, I mean, if that's framed in religious terms, there's nothing controversial about it. Uh, and, as when we talk, there's many scientific understandings of how, uh, for example, studies of remote viewing, uh,
Yeah.
you know, uh, that the science behind remote viewing is very solid. And remote viewing is our brain leaving the confines of this material body uh, and entering into a world of all knowledge and then bringing back pieces of that knowledge. So why is that any different than mediumship?
Yeah.
Mediumship is also interacting with some consciousness or entity outside of ourselves and bringing knowledge back. But
Yeah.
it does seem to make a difference.
Yeah.
Uh, I've lectured quite a bit for the remote viewers.
Yeah.
They've got the International Remote Viewers Association in the United States, which is
Yeah.
the that's the civilian face of the military remote viewing here, and military remote viewers don't want anything to do with mediums.
Wow.
So we have to come to some sort of common language that we can all feel comfortable with because science alone can't, understand spirituality. But people like yourself, I don't think can get to the, you know, uh, unless you understand science.
Yeah.
I don't think that there can be a good understanding. Both sides need each other.
Yeah.
Uh, but we're not going to be able to do it until we have a vocabulary that we're comfortable with.
Yeah. I'm
And,
glad you mentioned remote viewing because some of us from the groups that we frequent in philosophy and Hermetic idealism, we came across this document by the CIA because obviously after a certain time they have to release these top secret documents, and he was mentioning about the Monroe Institute and experiments with remote viewing, and if, funnily enough, this document talked about the universe as some kind of mental web or mental field or something like that, and it was a completely different paradigm to the one that we're being told to believe by mainstream scientists, mainstream science. And yeah,
accept that. I, I winced when you said that at first, but unfortunately, many mainstream scientists are not familiar with this type of evidence. We become, each scientist becomes so, proficient at their own field, they don't know what's going on in the other
yeah,
fields of science. So I'm going, I know it sounds like a that on the one hand, I'm saying science has clearly established that consciousness is a substrate of the universe. But I do also agree that many mainstream scientists are not familiar with that evidence.
Yeah.
Uh,
In a way, um, I would say materialist scientists, in a way, they almost ask us to believe in some kind of magic because they're saying there is only dead matter in the universe, and somehow that produces this amazing illusion that we call mind. But mind doesn't really exist. And I really can't relate to that. I think a lot of people are starting to realize that's almost sounding like magical thinking in itself. It's almost like they're saying, "Oh, don't worry, mind doesn't really exist. It only seems like it does." But it's like, hold on a minute. We feel
Mind
like we
is
are
the
consciousness, and
only thing that
consciousness is real.
exists.
Yeah,
From a scientific viewpoint, mind is the only thing that exists.
yeah,
And like I said, you know, I agree with you that many, probably most mainstream scientists are not familiar with this. But I can refer you back to that PBS series. It's a six-part series on the brain,
yeah,
and after you see it, you will understand that mind is the only thing that exists,
yeah.
and for an obvious reason. We're here to learn lessons of love. I'd like to talk to you a little bit. Have you remote viewed yourself, or do you do remote viewing? Or
Oh yeah, the remote viewing. I've
yeah,
um I've actually done over the years experiments with lucid dreaming, and then I was looking into out of body experiences because I thought I have to experiment with this. And every time I left my body, from my own experience was, I would always seem to end up in replicas of my bedroom or replicas of the real world. But funnily enough, sometimes I would seem to have glimpses of the future, like precognitive dreams. And these
of
dreams were
course.
like slash out of body experiences. So I would leave my body, I would see a replica of my bedroom, and then I would go outside and I would see some scene, some strange scene. Like one of them was um, a bike crashed into a vehicle, and then one of my neighbors at the time came out, all confrontational, had a go at the biker, and I woke up from that, and in this lucid dream, I was a floating point of consciousness overlooking the close where we used to live in, the neighborhood, and I was observing this, um, event taking place, which had nothing to do with me. And then I woke up from it, and I was thinking to myself, it's like I was out of body in the neighborhood overlooking this event. And for 2 weeks, I didn't hear anything about this event taking place. But then after 2 weeks, that actually took place, and the neighbors told me about this event, and it coincided with my experience, which took place 2 weeks prior. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, it's almost like I had a precognitive lucid dream or a precognitive OBE. And how could I have possibly known? And obviously, I would frequent sites and there would be physicalists telling me, oh, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's the brain is like a Bayesian machine. It makes predictions about the future. Maybe it just put two and two together subconsciously, and then it just happened to coincide with that event. But then I was thinking to myself, hold on a minute. The OBE, the apparently precognitive OBE, seemed to include the same people of the real event that took place 2 weeks later.
Of
So it
course,
seemed to
of
involve
course.
the same neighbor. It's just too much of a coincidence. It just makes me think, and because of these experiences, I think that's what always made me open to other possibilities. So I would have my upbringing, school, college, and people telling me, "Oh, it's materialism, it's Dawkins, it's Sam Harris, it's only physicalism. There's only matter. There's no spirit." I would have all these people telling me this. This is the new paradigm. physicalism is true and supported by science, but then I would have these experiences because I was so interested in altered states of consciousness, and it would just seem to contradict everything I was being told to believe.
Yeah.
So now I'm much more open to these other possibilities. I'm much more open to the possibility that something like idealism or panpsychism is more likely to be true than materialism, because materialism is making no sense to me anymore. It
So
just
that's why you're having these experiences to get you to to get you to evolve a little bit more.
yeah.
I have to tell you, one of my professors used to say, "Coincidence is the refuge of the lazy mind."
Wow.
But I'd like to now give you the scientific, uh, you know, side to what you just shared.
Yeah.
Okay, so I talked to you before about, what is, reality is this gigantic, infinite electromagnetic field, but I say infinite, but space does not exist in it.
Yeah.
Time does not exist in it. Well, what does exist in it? Information.
Right.
And, so the universe is made of information. And, this is, John Wheeler, for example, one of I think one of the most thoughtful American scientists.
Oh,
Uh,
right. Yeah. The physicist. Yeah. Yeah.
John Wheeler is, I think, one of the most eloquent people to point out that the nature of reality is information. Uh, People who are information theorists make that point that the closest way to get to understand God is to study information theory.
Right.
But information theory is the reigning scientific theory. Understanding information theory has led to cell phone technology, um, complex systems theories. I mean that underpin much of the engineering advances. I mean, just on and on and on and on. There's no doubt that information theory is the reigning scientific theory. Okay, so information's immaterial.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm always hearing people say, "But wait a minute, I can't believe in God because God's immaterial." Well, information is immaterial, and yet we know that it exists.
And take it
Um,
seriously.
and so, people such as just his name will come to me later on. Uh, but many prominent Hal Puthoff, another American physicist, believes that the brain is a read-write head in the informational universe,
Yeah.
and I think that that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
That we're immersed in this sea of information, and so that's what happened to you is that you were able to have a glimpse into the informational universe.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the informational universe is conscious because it does seem to want to provide these sorts of validations for us.
Yeah.
I mean, in your case, you didn't just get a glimpse of, a piece of information, a stray piece of information that had nothing to do with your own personal life. Um, but uh, whatever these forces are in the universe, took the trouble to make sure that you were validated, that you understood it wasn't just a stray piece of, like you were saying before, something you just sort of made up or what have you, but that it had its own validation built into it. You were able to find out, yes, that was actually a real piece of information.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, I'm gonna back up just a little bit to tell you about my journey into remote viewing, why I studied remote viewing. Um, I, I resuscitated a young man. Well, not me, my team.
Yeah.
Um, our team resuscitated a young man Um, his parents were ski instructors. So they were driving home from teaching skiing one night, and it was in driving snow in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State in the United States. And they came down and hit a patch of ice and then hit the guardrail for um, over a river. And their
Wow.
car flipped over the guardrail and they plunged into the river below. And they
Wow.
it took about 45 minutes for us to get there to resuscitate this young man. Um, as you know from Grey's Anatomy,
Yeah.
you're not dead until you're warm and dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, you're not dead until you're warm and dead. This young man, was in freezing water. His father unfortunately died in the wreck, and his brother died. But the first responders were able to get him out, and his mother also freed herself. And and once again, I feel this obligation to share with people my interviews with these children
Yeah.
because you have to hear it for the first time to know it's real. I can well understand people that when you read these experiences, they all kind of seem the same. They don't really, you don't really know. Is it, you know, uh, something they're making up, or is it something coming out of the cultural consciousness? Or, I can understand that, how hard people. But here's the advantage I have. So I'm interviewing this young man. I'm asking him, so what do you remember, about the time that you were in the hospital?
Yeah.
Um, and he says to me, well, I was in a huge noodle.
Oh.
And then he goes, wait a minute. It couldn't have been a noodle because noodles don't have rainbows in them. So you know that that's an authentic experience.
Yeah.
That's not something that he heard from, and the wonder in his face. Well, I was in the noodle. Wait a minute. No, no, it couldn't have been a noodle. And then when he tells the story again, you know, uh, he talks about it being a tunnel because that's the terminology that we've come to, expect. Uh, you know, um, but hearing it that first time, that's what I want to share with you
Yeah.
and your listeners, because you know that he's describing something real when
Yeah.
he talks about it that way. So then he says to me, but was it real, Dr. Morse? His experience. He went down the huge noodle, went into what he thought was an animal heaven, and he said, and there was a bee there, and it was really nice, and it gave me honey. you know, so they're odd. So for people who think that these are confabulated experiences, confabulation meaning that our mind sort of creates it out of the need to tell a story or out of the need to, to make sense of what otherwise seems incomprehensible. That's what we call confabulation.
Yeah.
He's not confabulating it when he says, "Oh, I saw this bee, and then the bee gave me some honey, and then I was in the human heaven." Um, and then he says, "But was it real? Because if it was real, you got to tell all the old people."
My
So
God.
this guy's having his an experience, and I personally know that he was clinically dead
Wow.
when we resuscitated. His
And yet
brain
he
was
was
not
having this experience.
is absolutely. So I took him seriously. I wanted to answer his question. And one aspect of near-death experiences that children say is that they feel they know everything. And this is seen in adults as well, that they go into a realm in which they seem to have all knowledge. In fact, there's adult near-death experiencers have even, very poignantly described the experience of coming back into their body. And they'll say, I lost everything. Everything I knew started going away. Until I was back in my body. And this particular, she had a near-death experience in the context of giving birth. And she said, and then I felt like I'd lost everything that I knew. And I looked down at my baby and I said, who's being born here?
Yeah.
She felt she was being reborn. So that's why I learned then to remote view, because remote viewing is objective proof that there is this informational reality. So, what is the military remote viewing?
Right.
We sort of have heard about, we've talked about that it's very hard to get our egos out of the way.
Yeah.
So that's why people then say, like what they said about your experience. The second one you told me, in which you had the sort of the flash forward. You got information that had not yet happened
Yeah.
in this current biological state. Of course, in the informational universe, there is no time. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
so
Yes.
so
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah.
So
Um.
you got the stray piece of information, but um, so but people made the comment to you, but wait a minute, it wasn't that your own mind making it up, etc. So the military remote viewers, they use numbers to code their targets. So let's
Right.
say the target is the Eiffel Tower. So they will say the target number is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, start to describe it for me. And it is an astonishing experience to be given a number and to work their protocol. And, after working the protocol for half an hour, 45 minutes, you come up with this incredibly detailed uh, description, which matches the Eiffel Tower, but you can never name it.
Wow.
And that makes sense because names, remember, God told man, it's our responsibility to name things. So
Yeah.
names are again a byproduct of our own brain. So, and I know that that's frustrating, you know, uh, um, uh, you know, detectives that work with psychics and such as that. It's they have to start to understand this process that they're not going to get a name, they're not going to get an address. Instead, they're going to get a detailed description, which then ordinary detective work can match. Uh, you know, so for example, I'll give you an example of this. Military remote viewers uh, helped to find Saddam Hussein, and they first looked for Saddam Hussein and they couldn't find him.
Yeah.
So they gave it to the military remote viewers. They could not say where he was. They couldn't describe, they in words, as in, he's underground. Instead, they said things like, where he is, it's dark, it's enclosed, it feels claustrophobic.
Right.
All the descriptions, the sensory descriptions,
Yeah.
because that is, it's our interface with this ultimate reality that creates these sensory descriptions or these sensory, uh, you know, uh, uh, sensations, and then we take those into our brain and we create reality. So
I
when you
see.
remote view, by and large, you can only get the raw sensory data. And again, when you go back to the masters of meditation, uh, the ancient Tibetans and the Buddha, etc., they say the same thing. They say that they get to the realm of sensation and they leave the realm of description. The types of description that we do.
Wow,
And
that's quite
this,
powerful.
when you understand this, you can then start to understand why people become so confused when they're trying to decipher, um, true spiritual events. So, for using the example of the Eiffel Tower, so let's say you're working the target that's the Eiffel Tower. So you're getting it's tall. Uh, you hear honking horns. It's you're getting the sounds of a city. Well, after a while, unless you're incredibly disciplined, like the military remote viewers are, after a while, your brain wants to get in on it. So your brain has suddenly decided it's the Seattle Space Needle. So now your brain starts to say, oh, I hear a ferry boat. Oh, and now your brain starts to graft in stuff that actually isn't there.
Right.
So it's a complex mixture of stuff that your own brain is creating, out of whole cloth, and your actual perceptions from informational reality.
I
That's
see.
why when we did our medium study, I coded all the questions for the mediums as words. I mean, as numbers, because a lot of these questions were highly charged, such as, what is the current state of humanity, with
Oh, the
all the
experiment
warfare.
with the
Yeah,
mediums and the certified
yeah,
mediums and what they were
right,
saying and how how humanity
right,
is advancing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually
right. And
interested
if
in
you
that.
ask a medium, what's the current state of spirituality, they're I don't care how disciplined they are, their own brain is going to jump in and
Yeah.
want to answer it. But when we ask the question as a number, then we got the real deal from this discarnate entities, from these clusters of information. That's all we are, is
Yeah.
clusters of information.
I
You
see.
know, so people say, oh well, do we, is there life after death? Well, of course there's life after death. Uh, we're clusters of information. That's all we are.
I see.
Clusters of information obviously are eternal. And it's
It's
clearly the
it.
way the universe works that these clusters of information um, have individual consciousness, they have group consciousnesses, they interact with this universal consciousness. There's obviously a whole, that's why we scientists need spiritualists,
Yeah.
because, you know,
I'm
there
interested
is a
in both
whole,
actually.
there's a
I was gonna
whole way
ask
of
you.
understanding.
Yeah, based on
It's,
everything you've said to me about remote viewing and then our brains and our individual minds, they tend to color in the information that we possibly get from outside externally.
yeah,
I've actually done some experiments because I was researching this and I came across Ingo Swann and then I came across the research from Michael Persinger, the God helmet and stuff like that. So I began to experiment with this and there was a point where it became very easy for me to have out of body experiences, but they would be like sort of like lucid dreams. I would separate into replicas of my bedroom, which were slightly inaccurate. And I would start to wonder, is it that I'm receiving something real, but also coloring in with my own mind, with my own imagination?
right.
So I decided to enter these states and visit people who I knew to be alive, right? So I began to visit a few people, and one of them was my friend from college, and I visited him. I visited him without
Oh, yeah.
telling him, and when I went
Yes,
there, I saw a replica of his house, but then I saw him on the floor, sitting in the meditative position, surrounded by CDs. So I woke up from that experience, and I called him and I said to him, I actually had an experience where I visited you. Your house looked slightly different, and you were on the floor surrounded by CDs. And he said to me, I've been into meditation and I've been meditating and I've decided to try and get rid of some of my CDs to see if I can let go of my possessions and be like the Buddha. And I was like, "What?" And then he said to me, before I could say anything, he said to me, "By the way, were the walls in the room I was in blue?" Because I hadn't told him this. And I said to him, yeah, actually, the walls in your bedroom were blue. And he said to me, actually, I've been thinking about decorating my bedroom and painting the walls blue. And I was like, what? No way. So you see what's going on. So it made me think, am I also traveling or just traveling in a mental realm shared by other minds? And
it's
because he was thinking about doing something to his bedroom in real life, in the physical world, I became privy to that information somehow. It's really, there's so much to explore. And I began to come up with all these theories about what's going on. Maybe it's a mental realm. Maybe we capture other people's thoughts. It's like telepathic OBEs, and somehow, sometimes I color the reality with my own thoughts, and sometimes I make alterations, but we can get the gist of what's going on out there on a broader scale. It's yeah. I'm sorry for rambling on about this, but yeah.
Why you're not rambling on at all. I'm riveted. This is so interesting to me. I'm so sorry that you're in England. I want to sit and talk to you all day. Um, I, I, I have to tell you that. So what you did, we had the same thought. When I was, our my medium study was funded by Robert Bigelow,
Yeah,
here in the United
Bigelow, yeah.
States. Yeah, and we had 19 mediums to answer his questions. So I wanted to vet our mediums. Well, mediums by and large, they contact, you know, dead entities, people's, mother, child, etc., who's died. Well, there's no way I can objectively study that. But I had the exact same thought that you had, is I said, wait a minute, if they're mediums, before I, enter them, as one of our study subjects, let's have them contact living people.
Yeah.
Why not? And sure enough, they could. And they were surprised because, again, we become so compartmentalized. They didn't really think, well, that's not what mediums do. Mediums don't contact living people, but well, I got the idea from we had a medium, a consultant for our study. Her name is Isabel Savreda Shafatan, and she actually, as part of her mediumship, uh, a client came to her and asked her to contact a comatose patient, and she successfully did it and was able to impact his medical care because through, he was able to communicate with her that he wanted different music played. Uh, there were things about his room that he didn't like. There were things about his room that he did like. Uh, so she was able to transmit all this to his family, and they were able to make changes. And then, sure enough, when he woke up, he verified all of this. But I do want to tell you about the. So I had one of our mediums. Um, uh, I had her. Again, we give them numbers.
Right,
I
yeah.
don't say, because you contact this living person in a hospital. I gave her a number that corresponded to a woman who was in a hospital being treated for a heart condition.
Wow.
And so again, I mean, she has no idea, you know. Uh, I mean, one minute I might be giving her a target for a lost dog.
Yeah,
Another minute I might be giving her a number that corresponds to one of the questions
right.
for our study. Uh, so I mean, so she has absolutely no idea, and that's essential because if she had some sort of idea, then, like you were saying, her brain would then, start to fill in, what she thought it should be.
Yeah.
So she, in fact, told me, well, she drew a little picture, and again, she can't say it's an old lady. That they can't, she said she can only say it's old, long hair, white, all of these, descriptions. Uh, and so then I asked her to interact with, this, whatever it was. And so, um, at this point, I did go ahead and I said, this person that you're talking to is in the hospital. So, why don't you talk to him? This was only after she had demonstrated to me that she had actually contacted the person. And so she said, hello. She said, things like, I think your daughter is coming to see you, stuff like that.
Wow.
Okay, so then, like you did with your friend, we then went to the woman and we said, okay, so what was it like for you? And she said, it was the weirdest experience. I was sitting there alone in my hospital room and I heard a voice say, hello. And I looked around and there was no one there. And then I felt something touch my arm and say, I think you're going to be okay.
Wow.
And then I heard, not thought, but I heard the same voice say, don't worry, your daughter will be here soon.
That's
And
quite
sure enough,
profound.
her daughter was there soon. So, this medium is obviously the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
She can, uh, and more studies like this need to be done.
Yeah.
And
No,
these types
definitely.
of studies, for people who are interested in it, um, I invite you to go to our website. It's www.isscusa. So I like, the letter
I'm going to
I,
check that one out.
SSCUSA.org. And we have a description of our medium study and
Yeah.
all the things that we learned from it. Um, which was very interesting and very similar to what we've learned from those who've had near-death experiences, which is that this reality is a school, that death doesn't exist, but it's a it's a painful school. It is not. This reality is not for sissies. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Um, and
Definitely. I would agree with that. Yeah.
and
Definitely.
when when as a scientist, when I go to when I read, the Tibetans and, etc., they say the same types of things. They say, I read a book called it's a recent book on the Tibetan, it's a modern Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Right.
I think the guy's name is Rinpoche, but I think Rinpoche just means teacher. So I'm not sure exactly what his name is, but in his book, he says that you're lucky if you go through a lot of a lot of bad stuff happens to you. He said you could go through 100 lives, which are just nothing really happens. You have a happy, good life. You're not going to advance spiritually at all.
Yeah.
You should be blessed if a lot of bad things happen to you. Because that's then the seed which will help you to grow and evolve to the next level.
I
Um,
see.
and and that fits from what we know scientifically.
Yeah.
Um, I've got to go back to that issue of that scientists and spiritual thinkers are not uh, talking the same language, because this discussion of the informational reality just reminded me of there's a guy in the United States. His name is Michael Shermer.
Oh, Michael Shermer. Yeah. The Skeptic
Oh, you know
magazine guy.
Michael
And
Shermer.
yeah. Yeah. I know.
He's like the big skeptic guy, and he's always, well, I don't think it's a bad thing to expose frauds and spiritual frauds. That's fine. He writes for Scientific American, and
Yeah.
he's all this kind of stuff. Um, he's written a number of books, and he goes on tour with Deepak Chopra, and I love Deepak Chopra, of course I do,
Right.
but their lecture series, quite frankly, is the science of the 19th century, arguing with the spirituality, of the 14th century.
Right. Yeah.
It's, they, you know, but so why am I bringing up Michael Shermer? So I was very astonished to read one of his columns in Scientific American in which he said that human beings are just information, that we're all just information,
Yeah.
that we're just clusters of what we remember, our interactions with other people, stuff like that. Um, like
Wow.
Michael Shermer.
Michael Shermer, yeah.
all information. Well, then, clusters of information exist in the informational universe. Uh, Clusters of information are obviously eternal. Um, we can interact with clusters of information.
Yeah.
Um,
It's almost like he's
you know,
admitting
I,
that reality is immaterial. It's all, if it's information,
exactly.
there's no
He's
substance, but
fitting
there
right
is
in
information.
with
It's
that
almost
sort
like,
of,
yeah,
he's fitting right into that idea that our brains are just read-write heads in the informational universe. By the way, another thing, these, I have this list of things that we've been talking about. I want to not forget to point out to people. I
sure,
had said earlier that it is not scientific heresy to say that memories are stored outside the brain.
right,
There is no modern theory of how memories, except for short-term memories, except for, you know, single cell organisms that they've been shown, they can show how, the very primitive memories, can be stored in neurons and such, but nothing like the complex memories that we have.
right,
Fred Lashley is well known and regarded as the father of modern memory research. And at the end of his career, he said, if I didn't know better, I would think that memories are stored outside the brain.
right, yeah,
You know, so if we're clusters of information, we're interacting all the time with our memories. And then sure enough, we're distorting our memories all the time. You
right.
know, that, that, and we're remembering other people's memories. And again, the evidence, we talked about how there's no evidence to support materialism. Granted, mainstream scientists, I agree, do not believe, or, well, belief is the right word because, they're operating out of a belief system, but they're just not familiar with the evidence. So, what evidence am I talking about specifically now? Children's memories of past lives.
Yeah,
There is excellent research on this. But what's fascinating is that oftentimes a child will describe spliced memories. They'll say, this work was done initially by Stevenson, and it's now followed up at the University of Virginia.
yeah,
Um, I've forgotten who is, Stevenson has since passed.
right.
But what they do is they interview these young people who say that they remember past lives. And then they're like prosecuting attorneys. They actually, they did basically what you did. They, but on a grander scale, they go and they try to actually find that past life and see
Wow,
if it in fact corresponds with the memory that the child is saying. And when they've done that, they've found that several lives sometimes get spliced together.
right. That's
And that would
interesting.
make sense. If we're accessing memories from the informational universe, and then, after, we become reincarnated and we're accessing memories which were, you know, we in a past life localized as being our memory,
Yeah,
uh, you know, then it makes sense that from time to time this happens. And I have to tell you what Ian Stevenson told me about this. I was had this exact same conversation with him, and I said, Ian, come on, I've read your work, but some of these children are describing two lives, and yet you documented that both lives were authentic, that they accurately described two lives that they would never have, no other way,
wow,
5 or 6 year old child would be able to access that information. Uh, and Stevenson said to me, he said, I'm trying to figure out what the anomalies mean. I'm not yet trying to figure out what the anomalies of the anomalies mean.
yeah. My God,
So
this is really deep.
when you look at his research, the evidence tells us that sure enough, Hal Puthoff, the theoretical physicist, his mathematical model of the universe is that our brains are read-write heads in the informational universe. That's a mathematical conclusion he came to. And yet we look at a guy like Ian Stevenson, who's only doing clinical research. The two of them don't even know each other. The two of them are not familiar with each other's research. And yet Stevenson's clinical findings precisely validate Puthoff's theoretical findings. And that goes back to when you were telling me about your group, and
Yeah.
you sort of smiled and said, "Well, there's a lot of amateurs here. Uh, we need amateurs in this field.
Yeah.
There are too many scientists in this field."
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I mean, I feel blessed because I'm coming close to being an amateur in the sense that I'm an intensive care unit physician. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't really, and I was trained in neuroscience, mostly though in the neuroscience of uh, anti-cancer drugs and their effects on the brain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of wandered into this field, but I can tell you, someone like Ian Stevenson, that's his whole life is studying the the time or the inclination to hear what theoretical physicists are saying. It's
Yeah.
got to be the amateurs who are going to knit all this together,
Yeah.
to create the new paradigm.
I mean,
So I'm
some of the
glad you
people.
got amateurs.
Yeah.
We need them.
I was going to say, Ian Stevenson seems to be given a lot of credit by some of the young and upcoming biologists like Michael Levin. He's been doing experiments with planaria, and he says that memories are not stored in brains, that it's more like fields, and creatures access these memories. And then it kind of lends credit to morphogenetic fields, which is a concept that what's his name, Rupert Sheldrake came up with before, and it turns everything on its head. What we thought we knew about biology and memories and brains, it's now called into question, and it's almost like single living beings are accessing the information from this field. And then we have to revisit ideas like reincarnation, past lives, and everything else. It's
I got to
amazing.
get some water. I got to come back and then comment on this. This is blowing my mind.
Okay, no problem.
I'm right now. I'm right here. So
No problem. This is interesting stuff.
I
Very
can
interesting
tell you
stuff.
right now that you're going to move this field further as an artist because you're familiar with Rupert Sheldrake's work. You're
Yeah,
familiar with the planaria research. You know, my Harvard trained neuroscientists that helped me with my medium study, they don't know any of that kind of stuff. But I've
right.
got to add one to your list. Um,
Oh, thank you. I'm always curious about this type of stuff, and yes, I'm an
no,
artist.
an experiment for you. So they did a study of butterflies in which they took while the butterfly was a caterpillar, they trained it that a certain chemical was was toxic, was an anoxic, and they trained it so that if they sensed the presence of this chemical, they would withdraw.
Wow.
Okay. Well, so uh, I didn't really notice about butterflies, but so when the caterpillar goes into the next stage, it liquefies. There's no neurons. Let's say, we're saying memory is stored in the brain. Well, that means it's somehow stored in neurons,
Yeah,
but no, nothing, nothing persists when it goes from the caterpillar state to the butterfly state.
yeah,
And yet they showed that these butterflies retain the memory of the noxious chemical,
Right.
that they were able to present it in the exact same way. And the butterfly
Wow.
somehow retain that memory.
Yeah.
And, I think you have to look at the work of someone like Rupert Sheldrake
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Definitely.
start to understand how that could be. Um, we have to start looking at different ways.
Yeah. Different ways,
That's
different
why,
possibilities. Yeah.
that's why we have to totally discard this materialistic paradigm, because not only is it not correct, but it's holding us back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because, people, they're not, we have to now start new ways of thinking
Yeah.
to explain this phenomena. And people have to have the guts to say, well, okay, maybe memory isn't stored in the brain. And
Yeah.
yet, relatively few scientists are doing that. Bruce Grayson, of course, because he's a colleague of Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. He is saying those kinds of things. But until this becomes the mainstream, we're not going to have a greater understanding of the science of consciousness.
Definitely. I mean, I've noticed that this doctrine of materialism holds us back because it gets people to start thinking that certain things aren't possible, and then they just become so dismissive of everything else, of other possibilities, and then they become dogmatic. I've noticed this, and it's we are shackling ourselves if we hold on to this belief, which is a belief. It's not really backed by science. It's a belief. It's an assumption, isn't it? It's like, you know, oh, it's a metaphysical assumption, I suppose. It's saying that reality is dead, is just matter, and everything else is an epiphenomenon, like you said. Consciousness doesn't really exist. It's just some kind of illusion, and it just doesn't make sense. It's the wrong picture, really.
I'll give you a prosaic example of what you're saying. There was a time it was thought that human beings could not run a 4-minute mile. I
Yeah.
mean, that was just, everybody knew you couldn't do it. In fact, the first person to do it had to be paced in a weird way. He had to have these sprinters, so he would try to keep up, and then a new sprinter would come on, and a new sprinter would come on.
Yeah,
Well, once that happened, once it was clear that a human being, I mean, high schoolers are now running 4-minute miles. I
yeah,
mean, so once we're all confined by what we think is possible,
that's right.
and we're constrained by it, and we've got to let go of that, because
Definitely.
it's like one of the things that the military remote viewers do is they like to have spoon bending parties.
Right.
And the reason that they do that is because they want to alert people that something that you don't think is possible. Uh, bending a spoon with your mind
Yeah,
is in fact possible.
yeah,
Well, science tells us it's possible because we don't actually see a spoon. We don't actually feel a spoon. We have a mental image of a spoon.
yeah, yeah,
We, that our biological sensors are sensing something, and then we've created a mental image. And our mental image, like you were saying, is constrained by what we think a spoon should be.
yeah, yeah.
And yet, when you're freed from that constraint, it's in a weird way. What I'm suggesting is we're not really bending the spoon. We're changing our mental model.
Right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
went to one of these spoon bending parties with my daughter, and I couldn't bend a spoon at all. And my daughter's like, "What are you talking about, Daddy?" Shh. And frankly, this wasn't just me. Many of us. The reason you have to have a party is because after I saw so many other people doing it, I thought to myself, wait a minute, I can do this. I mean, that guy over there, he's no smarter than me. He's not any, more gifted than me. Well, I can do this. And, and then was able to bend the spoon with my mind.
Wow.
And it's not that there's any value to bending a spoon with your mind,
Yeah.
but it's changing your mental perception. Give you a practical example of how this has worked. In the United States, there was a General Stubblebine. Um, a good friend of mine, John Alexander, was one of his colonels, and
Right.
he told me that General Stubblebine would call his men to attention, in a row in an auditorium, and take heavy duty spoons, thick, metal spoons, and throw them on the ground, and then you know, order them to bend those spoons with your mind. And
Yeah.
sure enough, they could. And the reason he did that was because he wanted his soldiers to know that anything was possible. That there would be situations in their lives, in their duties as a soldier, where they had to know, wait a minute, I can do this, even if it seems impossible.
Yeah.
And so that's why you know, that's the value of things like that. And that's why you know running remote viewing would change your reality and your view of reality. You will no longer believe in the materialistic paradigm.
Yeah.
After somebody gives you a number and you're able to describe that target, in three detailed pages. It's not a matter of, that you're going, some sort of, loosey goosey. Well, that any number of things could fit into, your description. No, you come up with a highly detailed description, which could only be your target. And,
Yeah.
and, that's what
Like Miss
bending the,
Z in the OBE experiment. Was it Charles Start who came up with that experiment and she was able to do it after a few tries or something like that. You know, she had like an out of body experience and she was able to see the number. But yeah, it's
so happy that you mentioned Charles Tart. Our organization, the Institute for the Scientific Study of Consciousness, was actually founded by Charles Tart.
right.
It's one of the great honors of my life that he turned his organization over to me. I guess it's been about 15, 20 years now. Um, but he's one of my personal heroes. Uh,
Oh, I see.
it's just and I just felt, so grateful to be able to take over his um, organization. And, I hope that the types of research, well, we've shown that spiritual healing is real. We've come up with a way of creating, if you will, Reiki healers.
Right.
We've been able to show that when Reiki healers are on their mark, we use specific biometrics. We we expected Reiki healers to be able to raise the white count of a
Right.
neutropenic patient.
Yeah.
So so we're not dealing with things like, that they made the patient feel better, or pain relief, which are very hard to quantify. You
Right.
know, we we showed that our Reiki healers could raise the white count of severely neutropenic patients. At the same time that they did that, they were able to alter the output of the electron flow of a true random number generator. So,
Right.
so at the
Yeah.
same time they were able to raise the white count of a patient, they were also able to alter the flow of electrons.
Wow.
They were to, we were able to document that they changed the structure of reality.
So
Or
the
they,
mind can, yeah. So
uh,
we can actually um influence random number generation, we can the mind is it's almost like the mind is over matter in a way. So mind comes first. The mentation, it all we have evidence for is mentation, really. And if we
Yeah.
believe we can do something, it really happens, doesn't it?
So when people say, you can create your own reality, well, we've been able to document that, that Reiki healers, when they're on their, that when they're actually doing real healing, that they can alter the stream of electrons. And the theoretical physicists know that electrons, which are,
Yeah.
you know, particles, can't be mainstream. There's no laws here. So, you know, that one person can truly, materialize something when everybody else, that's not their mental model of reality. But why not? I mean, it's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, if we can do it in a small scale, then that tells us that we need to study it more and see how it could be done on a greater scale. And
Yes.
certainly healing is, what I'm most interested in. There is clearly a relationship between remote viewing and healing. Uh, I don't know what it is more than that, but when humans are successful, uh, well, I'll give you an example from my own life. I had metastatic cancer that metastasized to my lungs.
Right.
And so, it was unfortunately something called Hürthle cell carcinoma that the only treatment for it is surgery. And so obviously, I can't take a whole bunch of little nodules out of my lungs.
Right.
So I had one of my friends remote view my lungs. And sure enough, um, they haven't gone, they haven't disappeared, but they haven't grown either.
Right.
So there's some
That's good.
serious relationship between remote viewing and healing.
Yeah.
Um, and these kinds of, again, what you were talking about before, if we're stuck in this materialistic paradigm,
Yeah.
then the new researchers coming up are not going to say, well, I'm going to get my PhD in understanding the link between remote viewing and healing.
Yeah.
That's going to be seen as nonsensical. And we've got to change that. And it's people like you that I believe, from what I've heard in this last 2 hours, I think, you know, as an artist, but you know the science so well, and
Yeah.
yet you know little pieces of it, and yet you're able to fit them together into a coherent picture, and that's what we need. Human beings need stories.
Yeah.
We need to, you know, I mean, it's well it's well known. I mean, on a personal level and a societal level, if we don't know why something happens, we won't believe it.
That's right.
There's many, many examples. One of the most famous ones is this poor guy, Semmelweis, was a physician in Vienna in the 1800s.
Right.
And he discovered, get this, he discovered if he washed his hands, his patients didn't seem to die of childbirth fever.
Yeah.
Especially if he'd come out of the morgue and he was, cutting up dead bodies. He discovered if he washed his hands, his patients wouldn't die.
Yeah.
So you would think that that would capture everyone's imagination
Yeah.
because he had empirical evidence. Like I've told you, all the empirical, you and I, not, I mean, we've shared together all the empirical evidence that mind is, mental
Yeah.
is number one. The world is a mental place. But his fellow physicians didn't believe him. He was ridiculed. He
Yeah.
ended up in a insane asylum.
Yeah.
He's like, why won't they believe me? because from their point of view, what? You're saying invisible little tiny agents are causing disease? Are
Yeah.
you nuts? We're not going
And
to do
people couldn't
that.
believe that.
It wasn't until the microscope, in Lister showed that there were, in fact, tiny little invisible organisms.
Yeah.
Showed with germ theory that these tiny little germs did cause disease. And then, boom. I mean, that's all it took.
Yeah.
Overnight, everybody was washing their hands.
Yeah.
And the same phenomenon is going to happen now. A lot of people, sort of in despair, you know, you know, you know, when are people going to finally start to understand? But we know from the history of, you know, well, I'll give you another one, continental drift. I
Yeah.
mean, you can look at a map
Oh, sorry.
and it seems so obvious that all the continents fit together. But when that theory was first developed in the early, 1900s by one of the most respected geologists of his time, it was ridiculed
Yeah.
because he had no mechanism to explain it. It wasn't until tectonic plates were discovered, that we have these giant plates that are moving underneath the surface of continents. So that wasn't until 1960 or 1960s. But then, boom, as soon as that was understood overnight, it changed, and
Yeah.
that is going to happen when the new paradigm comes because we're so close.
Yeah.
But we do need people like you in your organization to start to fit these pieces together and give us a new model so that, people can understand it.
Yeah.
Because, I understand these mainstream scientists, particularly if they've never heard a kid say, well, it was the huge noodle. Oh, no, it was a rainbow. You know, and they're kind of skeptical of these stories. They don't know what they mean. And it's if you're in the materialistic mindset, this seems absurd,
Yeah.
you know, and yet, so you're not able, neuroplasticity, Ian Stevenson's work, near-death research, remote viewing, it all seems like it's all these disconnected pieces which haven't been put together yet.
It's almost like if you don't follow the trends, if you don't follow the accepted narrative in the scientific community, then you're an outcast. Then we shouldn't listen to you. And it's a shame that people like Rupert Sheldrake aren't taken seriously and they're ridiculed. And only recently is his work being looked at now because of new research by biologists like Michael Levin, and they're starting to look at memories and fields and stuff like that. And but it's a shame that the originators of the idea, they're ridiculed first and then they're vindicated. Maybe someone like
Even
Lamarck will be
ridiculing
vindicated.
it's not Dr. Lanza. I mean, who is easily the world's greatest scientist,
Yeah,
you know, and yet because he came up with this idea that, consciousness comes first,
yeah,
it gets ridiculed. Um, but remember, for example, when penicillin was developed, well,
right,
then overnight, syphilis could be cured with penicillin.
right,
So you would think, but but we're all just human beings. We all have mortgages to pay. We all have, we all, people are chairman of their department of medicine.
yeah,
They would like their, so all the people that had all these complex theories of treating syphilis, they didn't want to hear it.
yeah,
They don't want to hear that there's this penicillin that can cure syphilis
yeah,
because that means that their jobs are going to be threatened. And
yeah,
that is a real threat.
yeah,
That means their kids aren't going to be able to go to private school. And those are real life concerns. So that's why it's often said that, scientific change comes when the old generation dies off.
yeah,
And, I certainly see that with neuroscience. It's the young neuroscientists that are so fascinated by neuroplasticity. And the chairmen of the departments that I work with, they're like, I don't know, yeah, I heard about it, but you know, I mean, isn't the brain just a fixed organism? They're just repeating the things that they were taught.
Yeah.
But those are things they're taught
Yeah.
that anchor their position in life, that
That's
make their
right.
kids, be able to go to school. So we have to, understand this, have compassion for it.
Yeah.
That this is the way that science is going to, uh, and it is going to take people like yourself to help to move it along. Because I don't think science alone can do it. Like what you were saying, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake's work, I mean, it's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And yet, he had a hard time getting it published in the medical literature. Um, why would that be? I mean, he's one of the most respected biologists in England, and
Yeah.
you know, you know, my experience has been a little different, but that's because I have this solid base of being an intensive care unit physician. So
Yeah.
that seems so, I don't know, real or scientific. So I haven't had as much trouble getting stuff published, um,
I see.
in the peer-reviewed literature. But I can well understand, particularly Ian Stevenson, stuff like that. He had to go to his University of Virginia Press to get a lot of that stuff published
Yeah.
because journals don't want to publish it.
Yeah.
They're even Nature published excellent articles on remote viewing, and they got intensive criticism for that.
Wow.
Just endless letters to the editor. How could you publish that crap?
Yeah.
That
That's
sort of
so
that
unfair.
reflex dismissiveness
Yeah.
instead of saying, "Hey, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the data." Of course, no data is ever correct.
Yeah.
Um, but let's see why this fits, why it doesn't fit. But if it
Yeah.
doesn't fit into the rating paradigm, it's too easy to just throw it all out,
That's
to
right.
dismiss it out of here.
That's right. Because you had some work published by is it some work that was published to do with near-death experiences, deathbed visions, and
Yeah.
past life memories by the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And it supports the work of Van Lommel as well. Van Lommel's Consciousness Beyond Life, which is one of his books. And do you find that sometimes they're quite accepting of new ideas and they're not afraid to publish ideas which contradict or challenge the old paradigm or the most accepted paradigm?
Well, both Dr. von Lommel and I, we kind of, the other thing is, I published a lot of papers
Yeah,
and I kind of, being part of the medical establishment, I kind of know, we talked about vocabulary earlier. I kind of know what vocabulary to use because
yeah,
I'm always sort of amused when people they say, well, near death research, that's not very scientific, is it? Our articles actually were published in the American Medical Association's
right, yeah,
pediatric journals. Dr. von Lummel's work was published in the Lancet,
yeah,
arguably the world's greatest medical journal. But both of us, I talked to Dr. von Lummel, I think 3 or 4 times, because our studies are very similar. We had sort of gold standard prospective studies of, in which we identified patients in advance.
yeah,
Didn't accept volunteers, didn't accept people. We went to them instead of letting them come to us, which is obviously going to skew the population.
yeah,
So, um, but we talk quite a bit about what's the best way to get this stuff published?
Yeah.
Because in my articles published in the American Medical Association's journals, and I also Contemporary Pediatrics devoted a whole um, journal issue to our work. But we didn't, we're not saying that God is real. We're not saying that any of this is real. We're taking more of the attitude that pediatricians have to, let's say, colic. You
Yeah.
know, a mother with a child who has colic. Well, you can debate endlessly whether colic is real, but we took the attitude of, wait a minute, the parent thinks that the child is crying excessively. And that, by definition, means that it's real to the parent.
Yeah.
And that is the approach that we took. We said, this experience is real to the patients,
Yeah.
you know, but not that extra step in saying it's real. And so a lot of times you sort of have to play you have to play the academic game,
Yeah.
if you want to get your stuff published. Because what does it matter? As soon as people read our articles, they
Yeah.
immediately went, wow, near death experiences are real. But to get it published, we sort of had to, dance around it a little bit. Um, say this is a subjective phenomena reported by the patient,
Yeah.
that type
Yeah.
of terminology. And that's why I think von Lummel has been so successful as well. Um, Because from the scientific standpoint, until it's in the medical and scientific literature, it's hard to be taken seriously.
That's right. I'll tell you what, Dr. Morse, I'm just gonna take a quick toilet break. So I'm just gonna press
I talk
pause.
how our mental constraints. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I've
so
got to take this to the next.
okay.
Our mental constraints hold us back. Um, so, what's the practical aspect of that? That we know the nature of reality is its probability. That that let's say, you know, I'm looking at my refrigerator over here. When I'm not looking at it, according to the theoretical physicists, it dissolves into nothing.
There's
Just
nothing. No
yeah,
standalone
right.
existence.
Yeah. It just becomes a mathematical probability. And the reason they can show this is because when I look at it again, it's actually changed. It's a different size.
Yeah,
Granted, it's, a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a millimeter different, but they can measure it and show that it's changed. It They show this in the laboratory that these double slit experiments that I can't. Every time I read them, I understand it when I read it, and then I can't explain it to anybody. But
yeah.
it's the same sort of an issue that if something is not observed, then
It's not
it's
there.
just probability. But
Yeah.
once it is observed, it becomes fixed. Well, so what does this have to do with my own personal practice of medicine? You were talking about I've been on unsolved mysteries. Actually, three of my cases have been on unsolved mysteries, but I
Right.
want to share with you one of them um, that fits with this. So I had a patient that had as a newborn, was born with what's called Wolman's disease.
Right. Waltman's disease. Yeah.
Wolman, and that's a universally fatal um, condition of the liver, and they call this the Christmas miracle because um, I had received the final lab results showing that this patient had Wolman's disease the day before Christmas.
Right.
And I was kind of conflicted. I was saying to myself, I don't know. Do I really want to ruin Christmas? You know, maybe I should, tell them the results after Christmas. But then I thought, it's not my place to make that decision. I mean, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's my job to, so I called the parents in and I told them, the child has disease. And the child, I think, was 3 or 4 months of age at this point and, weighed less than she did at birth. This is Taryn Hedlund, the case of Taryn Hedlund. So, well, she didn't die.
Wow.
Mother kept bringing her in month after month. She kept getting bigger. And it was almost like we didn't want to jinx it. So we didn't even talk about it. She come in and she like had gained weight and she was developing normally. So finally the mother says to me, like when Taryn was about 8 or 9 months old, she says, "So what's going on here? Well, you said she had Wolman's disease. She was going to die." I said, "Well, you know, maybe there's a spiritual, I'd done my near-death research and I'd seen, various spiritual healings and I just floated that out there. I said, I can't explain this scientifically. Maybe there's a spiritual reason for it. So she goes home and she tells her family, well, doctor, of course, I just sort of floated it out there, just sort of
Yeah.
like, maybe, you know, but she goes home and she tells her family, oh, Dr. Morse says that it was a spiritual miracle that must have happened, which I didn't think of. But sure enough, here's the story of Taryn Hedlund. They had a brother-in-law, a brother,
Yeah.
and he was sort of the black sheep of the family. And he hadn't been told, any of that. He didn't know anything about it. He wasn't really, he had some substance abuse issues and stuff like that. And oh no, just wasn't close to the family. So he's lying in bed that very night, and he hears a voice in his room, and the voice says, "Go put your hands on Taryn Headland's abdomen."
Wow.
and he's like, what? I didn't hear that. And the voice says, "Oh, to Taryn and put your hand." So,
Bloody hell.
so he's like, well, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. And then the voice says, no, you have to do it tonight. So he's so embarrassed about this. He doesn't even tell his wife. He tells his wife, I'm going to go out for some cigarettes. So he goes over to Taryn's house, and the family's all crying and everything because I had just given him the news. And he sort of, says hi. He goes up to Taryn's room. He puts his hands on her abdomen, and he reports that her abdomen glowed when he puts his hands on it.
Wow.
And then he left. So, um, and then all this came to light, after Taryn recovered. Um, so he asked me. He said, "Well, why was it me?" I said, "I don't believe in God. I don't have any spiritual beliefs. I'm not really even a particularly good person. I've had kind of a rough life, etc. So why would it be me?" But I believe it was him because he hadn't been told that Taryn had this Wolman's disease that was universally fatal. She was still in the realm of ability.
Yeah.
It was still an unknown. It
Yeah.
was like a real life Schrodinger's cat experiment. You know,
Wow.
it wasn't, so there was still a place, there was still, a place that the nature of reality, which we create with our mind.
Yeah.
Once I told the parents, sorry, you know, Darren's gonna die, she's got Woman's, well, then that makes it real. That creates their mental image, etc. But he didn't have any of that. And
Right.
that's why I believe that that happened. And I've seen this happen. I'm going to give you another example because, you know, the evidence, you know, I understand that just like Semmelweis, You know, the evidence can't be understood, until we understand the mechanism.
Yeah.
So I'm not, you know, I'm sort of hinting, the best I can understand the mechanism is that reality is in the realm of probability. But I'll give you an example, another one. Okay, so I had a patient. This one's too hilarious.
Yeah.
So I had a patient. They're baby in utero. They're you know the mother was pregnant, and she was diagnosed, the infant, or fetus, as having no brain.
Oh, oh, oh.
And this diagnosis came out of the University of Washington, and they are not giving a patient such a diagnosis unless they're certain. I mean, all you know, the most, sophisticated ultrasounds and, CAT scans, and definitely showed that the baby, in utero did not have a brain.
Right.
So,
It's like a
so,
weird case
um,
of Grey's Anatomy.
I was a pediatrician then. So, so they bring the patient in. The patient, the parents bring in the patient and has a brain. The infant obviously has a brain. Um, so, I was reading through the chart. I was like, I'm not sure I understand this. Is this the same chart? Do I have the right chart here? And the parents looked at me and they said, yeah. Can you believe that those doctors at the University of Washington, they told us that our baby didn't have a brain. Well, we knew that wasn't true.
Oh my
That
God.
was like the most ridiculous thing we had ever heard. You know, bullshit on that, basically is what they said. Of course, our baby has a brain. So, it's my opinion that, they didn't accept the mental model that the doctors had given them. They absolutely rejected it. There was no spiritual intervention. They didn't pray to God. They, you know, there nothing like that happened. They just looked me in the eye. They said, "Yeah, you got the right chart. Those doctors up there, wonderful. They told us our baby didn't have a brain, and we never went to see them again because we knew that they were wrong."
Yeah.
And sure enough, the baby was born with a brain. And I think that, this is an example of, this is a practical example of what we were talking about earlier. They didn't accept the constraint
Yeah.
of materialism. They didn't, you know, they just denied it. And this has been seen in the medical literature, not just my own. In Japan, they did a nice study. They were trying to understand um, why some patients with given fatal diagnoses, why some of them live and some of them die.
Yeah.
So they uh, they interviewed, they identified a cohort of patients who were given a fatal diagnosis and sent home to die, and then they went and interviewed. It was the exact same phenomena, Orlando. They found not a lot, but they found a handful of patients who were still alive, and the patients told them the same thing. They
Wow.
said, "Can you believe it? They, those doctors told me I was going to die. I knew I wasn't going to die. I knew that was a bunch of, I, you know, and again, no
What did they
spiritual
know?
intervention or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's the mind. I'll tell you my pet peeve. There's an example of the blind spot of doctors. We always talk about just the placebo effect.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, that was just a placebo effect." Okay, let's have a look at the placebo effect. Um, they did a study of surgery on Parkinson's patients, and they found that surgery for Parkinson patients with Parkinson's disease was
Yeah.
not uh, helpful because It did not outperform patients that were given sham surgery.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So one group got sham surgery, the other group got the actual surgery, and there was no difference between the two groups. But in the placebo group, patients recovered.
Wow.
Sham surgery cured them. But the actual surgery. So this was all just dismissed. Well, that was just the placebo effect.
Oh my God.
Just the placebo effect. How about this one? Minoxidil, the cream that people rub on their head to grow hair. Same thing. That was actually shown to outperform placebo.
Right.
But but the placebo effect worked for I can't remember the exact percentage, but something like 5 or 10% of patients that were given the placebo
Yeah.
cream to put on their head grew their hair back.
Bloody hell.
So, so why, but I mean, that shows the importance, frankly, of the work that you're doing. Because, I mean, that shows, I mean, nobody is saying, oh my God, really? You can take a placebo cream and rub it on someone's head, and a small percentage of those patients will grow hair. Maybe we ought to have a look at this. Maybe we ought to see how that happens.
Yeah.
But it's also evidence that the mind, you know, is is the primal mover.
Yeah.
It's
And belief is quite
Josh,
powerful as well,
right?
isn't it?
It,
Yeah. It's the
right.
mind and the power of
It,
belief. And it's
right.
very
The
poorly
power of
misunderstood.
belief
Yeah.
that it's just like it's no different than what we're talking about with neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
Experience changes our brain.
Yeah.
The mind, our thoughts change our brain. Learning to play the piano changes our brain. Believing that rubbing something on your head and being told this is a brand new medicine for hair growth, and we don't know if you're going to get the placebo or not.
Yeah.
Maybe if all the patients were told you got the real deal, maybe a greater percentage of them would have grown hair.
Yeah.
But you know, well, why isn't this being looked at?
Yeah.
Same
It
reason
should.
that nobody wanted to understand why Samboise's patients weren't dying of infection
Yeah.
because we don't understand it yet, and that's got to end. I mean, we have to understand that this is not just some sort of spiritual or philosophical quest.
No.
It's not understanding even that that it's um, that we're here to learn lessons of love and that kind of thing. But this actually uh, can change our lives.
Yeah.
It can change the trajectory of our lives, and and change how we live our lives.
Yeah.
People suffering from any number of depression and chronic diseases, uh,
Yeah.
to understand that their own minds are their best friend in terms of fighting whatever it is that they're dealing with.
Yeah. Which is why um, meditation techniques can help so many people, even to do with the recidivism group. You'll be able to explain this better yourself, but some people are helped to go back to society as productive members, and they become more spiritual, and they're able to connect with other people more than how they did before. And obviously they don't reoffend anymore. They begin
Yes,
to have this spiritual understanding and the connectivity with other people, and
think about this. It goes back to that first experience. Well, maybe it's the second one you shared with me, in which you said you had this experience in which you thought you were hearing other people's thought,
yeah,
and that you felt you were, but so. when you do that, you start to understand that you're part of a greater community, that your actions influence other people.
Yeah,
Um, one of the most powerful techniques that I use in working with the ex-incarcerator is a meditation technique called Tonglen, in which you actually try to understand the suffering that you've caused others. And that that this isn't just a mental exercise. Just like remote viewing, you know, you can get real information from remote viewing.
right,
That through meditation, you get real information about how your actions have caused others to suffer. And you start to understand that suffering yourself. And can transform people. And then, like you said, recidivism in the United States, I mean, it's horrible. I mean,
yeah,
we don't have an incarceration problem. We have a recidivism problem. You know,
yeah.
70% of people go back to prison within, um, 3 years. And yet the people that learn these type of meditative techniques, by and large, do not go back to prison.
That's brilliant. It makes me think that they realize it's all one mind, and it reminds me of some near-death experiences I've come across that involve life reviews, and sometimes there was this guy who had beaten someone up, and then he had an NDE because the vehicle fell on top of his chest, and then he ended up having this life review, and he said it was like f flicking the book of his life, and then it focused on that particular incident where he got into a fight with this other guy and he ended up breaking the guy's nose. But then he said that in the life review, he could feel the perspective of his victim being pummeled by him. And
Right.
it made him think that it's all one consciousness, and it made him judge himself. No, nothing else in his NDE judged him. It was just himself judging his own actions. And he wished he had behaved differently on that day, because the reason why they got into this altercation is that the other guy, and he didn't know this at the time, he only found out through the life review, that the other guy had lost his wife on the same day, and he got drunk, and one thing led to another, and the guys got into a fight. But the other guy in the life review ended up learning more about his victim, and he wished he hadn't done anything to him. He wished he hadn't broken his nose. And there's many other stories like this, obviously, as you know, and it just makes me
Mhm.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost like a realization that we are all in this together. We're all one mind, one consciousness.
We're one mind and one consciousness, and that we seem to be split into our individual parts so that we can learn these highly specific lessons. Um, you know, I we've got to wrap this up, but since you brought this, I just feel like I want to share everything I know with you and your listeners, because you brought up this issue of the life review. Um, it's a very powerful when you understand the life review. You know, my life, I always think it's about achievement. You know, getting honors and awards. And
Yeah.
I don't think I'm unusual that way. That's what we think, and we want other people to admire us in this, that, and the other. So one of the most powerful life reviews. This is an adult. This woman was uh, a pharmaceutical executive and very proud of everything she had achieved, in her field. So she gets her life review. What she learned was the most important thing she did in her life was that when she was a teenager in summer camp, she was kind to a handicapped child.
Wow.
That's what she learned was the meaning of her life. And um, I mean, well, hearing that changed my life
Yeah.
because I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I've got it all wrong. It's acts of compassion
Yeah.
That's what, we're here to learn.
Yeah.
And I learned this in a different way, too. For so often we feel that our lives aren't important, that we don't have meaning, that, or, you know, well, I've got a great job as a doctor, but, you work as I don't know, selling shoes, so you must not be as important as me, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I did a study of my children that I studied, when we, interviewed them after their cardiac arrests. But then I studied them 10 and 20 years later. And I heard the same thing again and again, that they said that what they learned over the years was that their lives were important and had meaning. And I was a lot younger then.
Yeah.
And, so I was like, all righty, so what? You're going to have a cure for cancer, or, now your life is so important, and all this kind of stuff. And, that's what I was assuming that they meant. And again, these, now, young adults told me, no, what we learned, well, one guy said to me, I don't think I'll ever know why my life is important. Maybe I'll walk into the street and that'll make a car stop so it doesn't hit me. And then that'll lead to a sequence of events that'll change someone else's life.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what my life is about.
Yeah.
Or the funniest one was, um, this young man says to me, he said that he learned that his life was important and he had a very important job. And again, I think I was in my late 30s then, and I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm going to hear, it's all righty. Tell me, so what was your job? What do you think your big job is? And he looked at me and he goes, I already told you what my job is. That was on your intake questionnaire. I run a small remodeling company, and I've hired all of my high school friends. And those numbnuts would never have a job if it wasn't for me. And and
Yeah.
so that's what he perceived. You know, that's what living a life being touched by the light of the near-death experience teaches you. That his job, of running this small little remodeling company,
Yeah.
that was meaningful. That was the purpose of his life. That's why he was here on earth.
Yeah.
So think about all the other people,
Yeah.
everyone listening to this, no matter what it is you're doing. That's the purpose of your reason here on life. And
Yeah.
to me, that's a scientific statement based on the evidence.
Yeah.
That's not a philosophical statement.
It's
So I just had to share those two things with
no, it's I'm glad that you shared that because you know, before I let you go, and you're always welcome to come back and expound upon some of these ideas and and the evidence that backs up what many people would find incredible. But I'm glad that you shared that because uh, many people say, why do wars happen? Why does this happen? There's so much conflict in the world, and I keep remembering a few years ago watching a documentary on Netflix about the Ukrainian Revolution. And when I watched the images and what people filmed as the revolution was taking place, and people were rebelling against the oppressive state run by Russia, and the oligarchs and that. And when I watched the documentary, and I saw how people came together against the oppressive authorities. I saw how people helped one another and how they taught one another about, you had veterans teaching men, women, and children skills on how to protect and defend themselves. And they all came together and they were fighting against the oppressors and they were dying. But as they were dying, they were huddled together and pushing forth and singing the national hymn. And when I saw that scene, it really touched me because they were together, working together, almost like they were. fighting and singing and watching each other die around them, but they persisted because they believed in unity and they had this, it was like love bringing them together and they had a
Beautiful.
common goal. And to me, I found that really touching, really quite powerful. And it was all in the context of war and, a revolution taking place, you know.
So what a beautiful story, because you're absolutely right. So many times we cry out, why has this bad thing happened to me? I've done everything right. I did all the right things, and yet something bad happened to me. And we're not understanding, like it's that bad, so-called bad thing that then has the power to transform us.
Yeah.
It, oftentimes grief is growth. Well, maybe this is a place we can end because
Yes,
we're almost
definitely. Thank you very
into it.
much, Dr. Morse. It's
Oh,
been a pleasure, and you're always welcome to come back. Thank
what a great pleasure. Now, will you, send me a link to this so I can put it on my website or whatever?
Absolutely no problem. I
Oh,
will send you a
great.
link, and pe people are going to love this. Trust me, they will love it.